The desert was a living thing, ancient and watchful, and Lena felt its breath on her skin as she walked. The heat pressed down like an invisible hand, and the ground beneath her feet shimmered, tricking her eyes into seeing rivers where there were none. Every sound was swallowed by the wide silence, the buzz of an insect, the dry rattle of a dying yucca. The horizon never changed, only rolled away farther, as if mocking her. She had stopped believing in direction, there was only forward, and the will not to fall. The sun burned her shoulders, turning her once dark dress the color of sand. Her hair, black as obsidian, clung to her neck in damp ropes. She carried nothing now, no food, no water, only the medicine pouch that had belonged to her little brother. She touched it when her mind began to fade, when the air shimmered and the world bent around her like a mirage. The pouch reminded her of who she was, Lena, daughter of Taklashim's people, born where the river meets the stone. But her river was far away now, and her people scattered. She had fled before dawn 2 days ago. The soldiers had come suddenly, with the sound of thunder, horses pounding the ground, rifles glinting in the rising light. They'd burned the camp. She remembered the smell of smoke, the screams, the way her mother's voice was swallowed by the wind. She had run barefoot into the hills, clutching her brother's pouch, not daring to look back. She'd thought she could find the mountain trails, that she could vanish into the rocks the way her father once had. But the soldiers had driven her south, into the open desert. Now she was alone. Even the coyotes no longer followed her. The first night, she had tried to build a fire, but the matches were wet with sweat and tears, and she'd given up. The stars had been her only company, cold, bright, and pitiless. She had spoken to them softly, in her mother's tongue, asking for guidance. The second night, she stopped speaking altogether. Her lips had cracked too badly to move. She walked like a ghost beneath the endless dome of the sky, her body growing lighter with every step, as if she were being erased. By the morning of the third day, her shadow was gone. The heat was so fierce that even the insects had hidden. Her tongue felt like a stone in her mouth, and she could taste blood. Her eyes burned. She began to see shapes in the distance, people, rivers, cool green trees that swayed with invisible wind. Once, she thought she saw her brother running ahead of her, laughing. She followed him until she tripped on a root that wasn't there and fell hard onto the ground. The earth was hot against her cheek, and she stayed there, breathing in the scent of dust. She thought about her father then. He had told her once that dying in the desert was not a shame, only a return. The sand will take you back to the mother, he'd said, and your breath will rise with the wind. She had not understood it as a child, but now, lying there, she began to see. The desert wasn't cruel, it was patient. It waited for everything to come home. She closed her eyes and let her mind drift toward that waiting peace, that vast silence that was neither pain nor fear. But then she heard something, a distant creak, a rhythm that didn't belong to the land. It was faint, carried by the wind, but it stirred her enough to lift her head. Hoofbeats. The sound of a horse moving slow, cautious. She tried to call out, but her voice was a whisper swallowed by the air. She managed to raise one arm, though it felt heavy as stone. The world spun around her, and the sky went white. The sound drew closer, stopped, then there was only the soft jingle of metal and a man's shadow falling across her. Through half-closed eyes, she saw boots, worn and dusty. A hand touched her shoulder, rough, but not cruel. A voice spoke in English, low and uncertain, as if he were afraid to frighten her. She didn't understand all the words, but she caught the tone, surprise, concern, a quiet kind of sorrow. She tried to speak again, to tell him not to be afraid, that she meant no harm. But the world tilted. The shadow grew longer, darker, until it covered her completely. Strong arms lifted her. She felt the sway of the horse beneath her, the rhythm of hooves against the sand. Her head rested against the man's chest, and she could smell leather, dust, and something faintly like tobacco. It was a human smell, alive, grounding. For the first time in days, her body loosened, surrendering to the motion. She didn't know where he was taking her, only that the desert was fading behind them, and that the light on her face had softened. When she opened her eyes again, there was wood above her instead of sky. The air was cool. She tried to move but couldn't. A blanket was tucked around her. The walls were made of rough-hewn logs, and light filtered through a small window. Outside, she heard wind pushing against a door, and the sound of a horse shifting in the dirt. Her throat ached too much to speak. She closed her eyes again, not out of weakness but disbelief. She had been ready to die beneath the open sky, to return to the mother as her father had said. But now there was breath in her lungs and warmth at her side. The scent of life, of survival. She did not yet know the man who had found her or the place where she rested. All she knew was that she was still here, caught between the world she had lost and the one that waited for her beyond that wooden door. When Lena woke again, the light in the room was softer, slanting in gold through the window. The scent of coffee lingered faintly, mixed with the dust of old wood and something cooking. Her body ached everywhere, but the fever had broken. She turned her head slowly, noticing the basin of water near the bed, the folded cloth still damp. Someone had cared for her carefully, patiently. Her throat was dry, and her voice felt foreign when she whispered a word in Apache, a prayer, not expecting an answer. Yet from the next room came a quiet rustle, a man's step. Eli McCrae appeared in the doorway, tall, sun-worn, a man carved out of the same land that surrounded him. His shirt was faded, his beard rough, his eyes the gray of a winter morning. He paused when he saw her awake, not moving closer right away, as if afraid she might vanish if he did. She saw the hesitation in him, not fear, but respect. He set a tin cup on the table beside her, filled with water, then stepped back. "Drink slow," he said gently. "You've been out near 3 days." She reached for the cup, her hands trembling. The first sip burned her throat like fire, but it was the sweetest thing she'd ever tasted. She drank in small swallows, her eyes never leaving him. He waited, silent, leaning one shoulder against the frame. When she finished, he nodded, as though confirming something to himself. "Found you out by dry wash," he said after a moment. "Didn't think you'd make it through the night." His voice carried no judgment, only quiet fact. She wanted to thank him but couldn't find the English words. Instead, she touched the medicine pouch still tied around her neck and bowed her head slightly, the gesture of gratitude from her people. He seemed to understand. "You Apache?" he asked softly, though he already knew. She nodded once. For a long moment, they said nothing, the silence thick with everything that could not yet be spoken. He went to the stove, lifted a small pot, and poured something warm into a bowl, broth, thin but fragrant. He set it near her and stepped back again, giving her space, as if her trust was something fragile that might break at the slightest sound. She ate slowly, the heat of the broth easing through her body. He watched without staring, busying himself with tasks that didn't need doing, folding a towel, checking the fire, setting his tools in order. She studied him between spoonfuls, noting the lines carved deep into his face, the loneliness in his movements. Everything in the cabin was built by his hands, plain, sturdy, precise. It was a man's world, meant for survival, not comfort. Yet somehow, he had made room for her in it. That small kindness filled the silence more than words ever could. Outside, the wind rattled the window. He looked out briefly, then said, "Storm coming tonight. You're safe here. You rest." She wanted to ask why he had helped her, why he had risked anything for someone like her, an Apache girl, in a land where her people were hunted. But exhaustion pressed her down before she could form the question. She lay back, still holding the pouch, eyes drifting shut. His footsteps faded. She thought she heard him moving quietly outside, tending to the horses, humming a tune she didn't recognize. The sound wrapped around her like a memory of peace. When she woke again, night had fallen. The storm had arrived, rain drumming the roof, thunder rolling across the plains. The fire burned steady in the hearth. She sat up slowly, testing her strength. Eli sat at the table, mending a piece of tack, the lamplight turning his features warm. He looked up when she stirred. "You can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. He gestured toward the window. "Been a long time since we had real rain. The land's been waiting." His tone was reverent, as if the storm were a blessing, not a danger. She moved her gaze toward the fire, the shadows dancing across the walls. The sound of the rain reminded her of home, of her mother's voice, of laughter under cedar trees. For the first time since the attack, tears gathered at the corners of her eyes. She turned her face away quickly, ashamed. Eli noticed but said nothing. He only set down his work, stood, and placed another log on the fire. "You don't have to talk," he said quietly. "Sometimes just breathing's enough." She looked at him then, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met with unspoken understanding. Days passed like that, slow, careful. She grew stronger. He never pressed her with questions, only offered what he could: food, warmth, silence. When she was well enough to stand, he showed her the well behind the barn, how to draw water, how to feed the chickens. She watched him work with the animals, saw the gentleness hidden beneath his rough hands. There was sorrow in him too, deep and private. Once, she saw him kneeling by a small grave behind the corral, hat in hand, and she understood without asking that he had known loss. When he came back from the fields that evening, she was waiting with water from the well, a quiet offering. He accepted it with a nod, the faintest trace of a smile touching his lips. Neither spoke, but something shifted between them, a thread of trust woven through shared silence. She began to hum again, soft songs of her people while she worked. He didn't ask what they meant, only listened. The house that had once been filled with only wind and the creak of wood now carried her voice, thin but alive, echoing gently beneath the storm-gray sky. She knew she could not stay forever. The world beyond the ranch was still dangerous for someone like her. But for now, she was safe, a stranger taken in by a man who owed her nothing yet had given her everything that mattered. She stood by the doorway one evening, watching the sun sink behind the mesas, the land glowing red and gold. Eli joined her, hands in his pockets. They didn't speak. The silence between them was no longer empty, it was a promise, fragile, uncertain, but real. For the first time, Lena began to believe she might live again. The morning came with a stillness that felt uneasy. The storm had passed, leaving the earth damp and fragrant, but the air carried a tension Lena could not name. She moved through the yard, feeding the chickens, the sky above her pale and brittle as glass. Eli was mending the fence by the northern pasture, his hat low against the sun. From where she stood, she could see the line of the horizon tremble with heat, and something else. A small cloud of dust. Riders. Her heartbeat quickened, though she said nothing. She set the feed bucket down quietly. By the time Eli returned to the house, she already knew. His jaw was tight, his movements deliberate. "You saw them too," he said. She nodded. 3, maybe 4 men, she murmured. Coming from east. He looked at her, a long moment of silence stretching between them. "Could be ranch hands," he said, though they both knew better. He checked his rifle, the motion practiced, careful. She wanted to tell him to let her go, to spare himself the trouble. But before she could speak, he said, "You'll stay inside." No arguments. When the riders arrived, the dust followed them like ghosts. They were rough men, their faces shadowed by the brims of their hats, spurs clinking as they dismounted. One called out Eli's name, voice slick with authority. "We're looking for an Apache girl," he said. "Ran from a raid up north. Word as she might have passed this way." Eli stood on the porch, rifle in hand, calm as the land itself. "Ain't seen anyone," he said simply. The man's eyes narrowed. "Funny thing," he drawled. Tracks said otherwise. The tension between them stretched thin as wire. Inside, Lena watched through a small crack in the curtain, her breath shallow. The men looked cruel in the daylight, their clothes dusty, their mouths twisted in the kind of smiles that promised nothing good. She saw one of them glance toward the barn, and her stomach clenched. Eli shifted slightly, blocking their view. "Tracks lead all over out here," he said evenly. "You can follow 'em till your horse drops, you still won't find what you're looking for." The man spat into the dirt, glancing past him toward the cabin. "You live alone?" he asked. Eli didn't blink. "Always have." The leader smirked, not quite believing. "You mind if we take a look around?" he asked. It wasn't a question. Eli's hand tightened slightly on the rifle. "I do mind," he said, voice still quiet. "You've got no call to search my land." For a long, dangerous moment, no one moved. The sun pressed down, the flies hummed, the horses stamped restlessly. Then the man laughed, short, sharp. "Suit yourself, rancher," he said, turning his horse. "But if she's here, she'll burn with you." The others mounted up, and soon the dust swallowed them again, leaving only silence and the fading echo of hooves. When Eli came back inside, his shoulders were tight, his face unreadable. Lena stood near the table, her hands trembling. "They will return," she said quietly. He nodded. "Most likely." She stepped closer, the fear in her eyes clear but steady. "You should not risk this. I can go when the sun sets." His eyes met hers, tired, resolute. "You go out there, you won't last an hour," he said. "And I ain't sending you to die." She stared at him, struggling to understand the kind of kindness that made a man stand against his own world. The afternoon dragged heavy with silence. Eli packed supplies, checked the horses, and doused the lamp early. When night fell, the air was thick with the smell of sage and rain. He led her to the corral, where 2 horses waited. "We ride west before dawn," he said. "There's a canyon past Devil's Ridge. They won't follow that far." She looked toward the horizon, where the stars shimmered faintly. "You would leave your home?" she asked. He hesitated only a second. "Home's just wood and dirt," he said. "Ain't worth much if I gotta betray what's right to keep it." They rode out under a thin moon. The land was silent except for the whisper of the wind through mesquite. Lena kept her gaze forward, the desert opening before her like a dream she'd lost and found again. Behind them, the ranch shrank into darkness. She thought of all the people she had loved who were now gone, and for the first time, her grief did not hollow her, it steadied her. She realized that this man beside her, this stranger, had become the thread that tied her once more to the living world. By morning, the sun painted the canyon walls in fire. They stopped to rest by a stream that trickled through the rocks. Eli crouched by the water, splashing his face, while Lena stood nearby, the wind tugging at her hair. "You saved me twice," she said quietly. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Maybe you saved me first," he said. "Ain't had a reason to speak to another soul in years. Then you show up, and suddenly the world feels less empty." She smiled faintly, the first real smile since before the raid. The sound of it was like wind in the grass. They stayed there until the heat began to rise. When they finally turned west again, Lena glanced back one last time. In the far distance, a trail of smoke rose from where the ranch had stood. Eli didn't look, but she saw his hand tighten on the reins. She wanted to say something, anything that could make the loss easier, but there were no words for it. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand gently over his. The gesture was small, but it held all the gratitude and sorrow she carried. As they rode deeper into the wild land, the world around them began to bloom again, mesquite in flower, birds darting between red cliffs. Life returning after fire. Lena felt something new stir within her, fragile but strong. She did not know where they were going, or what waited beyond the ridge, but she knew she was not alone. Eli glanced at her once, and their eyes met, not with promise, not with possession, but with a quiet understanding of 2 souls who had chosen to keep each other alive. And that was enough.